In our last video, we looked at a celebration of a sort of Thomas Edison, young Tom Edison, that was specific to Port Huron. But in 1929, there was another celebration of the 50th anniversary of Thomas Edison's incandescent light bulb. It was called Light's Golden Jubilee. And this wasn't specific to Port Huron. This was a national celebration. The government issued a 2-cent stamp that celebrated this anniversary for Edison. Menlo Park, New Jersey had these postcards available. Of course, Menlo Park is where Edison had his laboratories. And the front of this card does nothing but glorify Edison's achievement. Here's an interesting stamp on the left-hand corner. Dawn of the Golden Age of Science. Over here we see the postmark goes even further. It states that Edison's celebration of Light's Golden Jubilee, 1879 to 1929. And at the top it says, today we celebrate the achievement of a man whose deeds place him definitely among the immortals. Quite a write-up for a little postcard. St. Louis built this magnificent arch at the end of their street. It was all covered with lights as their way of celebrating the Light's Golden Jubilee. Pittsburgh had just about every light in the city turned on, and then they put spotlights throughout the city, going back and forth, as you can see from this photo. Each city had their own way of recognizing this achievement from Edison. There were souvenir plates and there were souvenir coins. But the biggest event was held right here in Michigan. No, not Port Huron, at Dearborn, Michigan, where we recognize as the Greenfield Village area now. This invitation was a special invitation given out to VIPs and their friends. The honor of your presence is requested by Mr. Henry Ford and Mr. Edsel Ford at a celebration in honor of Mr. Thomas Alva Edison on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of his invention of the electric light and the dedication of the Edison Institute of Technology by the President of the United States on Monday, October 21st, 1929. Before it was known as Greenfield Village, it was known as the Edison Institute of Technology. Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and President Hoover and their wives boarded the train. Their final destination was going to be the Smith Creek Station. Of course, it wasn't in Smith Creek anymore. Henry Ford had it moved to Greenfield Village, and that's where they disembarked. Remember in our last video we said this was the same train that Mickey Rooney was on, at least the engine was the same pulling it. This was the same station that Edison got thrown off at, but this wasn't the same location. And what I meant by that is what we're seeing here. This is Greenfield Village as we know it today. It rained almost all day that day, but it didn't seem to dampen anybody's spirit. Here we see Mr. Edison being helped off the train car by President Hoover. And here we see him walking through the crowd. That's Henry Ford on the left, and then President Hoover, and of course Edison. Today, Greenfield Village looks like this when it's raining. Nice cement sidewalks and streets. But back then, in 1929, Greenfield Village was just a mass of mud. There were no cement sidewalks or no cement streets. And of course, they had carriages lined up to take care of the people, but they had to get to the carriages. And it was pretty muddy. When I look at historical pictures like this, I always think, wouldn't it be great if it was filmed? You could see it, live action. And quite frequently I don't, but every once in a while I luck out, and this particular event was caught on film, and here it is. Here we see the engine pulling into the Smith Creek Station in Greenfield Village, actually passing a much older engine than the Sam Hill. Sam Hill was renamed for this occasion. It was renamed the President, and we'll take a better look at that in just a second. You know, Edison must have been a little bit excited about coming back to that Smith Creek station and realized how far he had come since that time he got thrown off the train here. I know I would. Here Edison is being helped off the train by President Hoover. Here they are looking over the engine. I told you that Henry Ford renamed the engine in honor of this occasion, and you can see by the plate on the front of the engine it's called the President instead of the Sam Hill. And you can see that same plate today if you go back to Greenfield Village. Actually, you can see more than the plate. You see the complete engine that's at Greenfield Village. I especially like this part of the film where it shows the people trying not to get their good shoes dirty as they're walking through the mud. That evening there was a sumptuous banquet put on for Edison and his guests at this replica of Independence Hall, which wasn't quite finished at the time, but finished enough so they could have the banquet there. This next photo we're going to look at is actually a painting of this event that took place that evening. I was able to locate a recording of the speech that Edison gave that evening. Now most of it is really not recognizable, but the opening remarks are, and so that's what I want you to listen to right now.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, no words of mine can satisfy your hearts. Thomas A. Edison. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I am told that tonight my voice will reach out to the four corners of the world. It is an unusual opportunity for me to express my deep appreciation and thanks to you all for the countless evidences of your goodwill.
This photo is actually a painting that was done at Henry Ford's request in 1938. It took 7 years to complete, and one of the reasons it took so long is that every person there was painted individually so you could recognize them, at least all the important ones. You can see some of the names here that attended that event that evening. Quite a who's who of people. After the banquet, Edison, Ford, and Hoover went to the reconstructed Menlo Lab in Greenfield Village to recreate the lighting of the first electric lamp. There, Edison and Francis Gill, his former assistant, who you see pictured here, both went to work, much like they had half a century earlier, preparing to forever change the world. The entire country was urged to turn off their lights for the evening, only to flick the switch back on at the exact moment when the elderly and emotional Edison, seated in his now relocated laboratory in Greenfield Village, connected 2 wires to recreate the exact moment of the invention of the light bulb. As the connection was made, the museum building was bathed in light, and the replica of the Liberty Bell sounded in the belfry. Overhead a plane flew by with the words Edison and the date 79 and 29 illuminated under the wings. Car horns sounded, lights flashed on and off, and the world bathed itself in electric light in tribute to Edison. So why did I just show you 9 minutes of something that really had nothing to do with Port Huron? Truth of the matter is, it had everything to do with Port Huron. Sometimes we look at a parade, we look at an event, and we don't really realize the significance behind it. This was a national event. Port Huron were some of those people that were flashing their lights on and off on their automobiles and honking their horns when that light was connected. They were some of the people that were telling their family and their kids what it was like before the electric light and how much they should appreciate it a chance for an object lesson. And the other thing would be, hey, it's my video, I guess I can put in what I want. So how does Port Huron celebrate this event? Well, a couple of different ways, actually. The merchants were encouraged to display their windows with something about Edison, similar to this. This happens to be the Detroit Edison building, but others were similar downtown Port Huron as well. And of course, the city fathers wanted City Hall to look great too, and so they did. First of all, they put these two large white pillars out front, each one with a plaque, and I would imagine that plaque said something about Edison, although we can't really read it. 1929 was the only year I ever saw these pillars with these plaques in front of the courthouse. And then, of course, you go in further into the courthouse, closer up as you zoom in, you can see Thomas Edison's portrait right in the front of City Hall. And then as you go up and look along the top, you see the flags and the patriotic bunting that goes along the roof line. So I think it was a pretty impressive sight in October of 1929 to be standing in front of that courthouse. By 1929, the streetcar had advanced a long ways from the horse-drawn streetcars of 50 years prior to that. But in order to celebrate the Jubilee of Light, the city brought back the horse-drawn streetcar, which you see here. And on the side of the streetcar, you can see the date, 50 years prior to 1929, 1879. And here it is going through Port Huron. This young fellow on the bicycle looked like he's trying to keep up with it, which I don't imagine was too tough to do. There was also a large parade that day, celebrating the Jubilee of Light. And here's a float that pretty well describes it. Let there be light. You'll notice that some of these pictures you'll see are very, very nice, clear, and other ones are not so nice. But they're all a picture in time. They're all a piece of history, and I'm very privileged to have them. You and I are probably seeing this for the first time. I've looked at this picture many times and never realized what was on top, but it says that it's a replica of Thomas Edison's original light or lamp. Can't quite make it out. Then it has the bulb on top, and it has the picture of Edison on it. First time I ever really saw that. And here's the same float going through town in a parade. And there's a few other things you can look at in this photo I think that are interesting. One is this Florsheim shoe billboard, and that's by Foster's Shoe Company. If you've been following my videos, you know exactly where that is. The next billboard shows that the brand new 1930 Nash 400 is out. And here we see a typical gas station that dotted the landscape back in 1929. Had the protection over the pump so the folks wouldn't get wet. Pumps are no longer out in the wide open. And here you can also see a couple of fellows sitting on top of the roof. Great view. All the major merchants and some that weren't so major had a float in the parade, as well as other places such as the railroad. And here we have a railroad, Pierre Marquette Railway, that made this float, and has a replica of the appears to be the Edison station. And if you look closely up the top of the roof line, you can see Edison's portrait. This float was created by Troy Laundry Company. And as we zoom in inside the circle, you can see it says Lights, Golden Jubilee. And then on the rear of the float, you see the light bulb. I would assume these are all flowers, similar to the Rose Bowl parade. I would have liked to have seen these floats in color, but they were beautiful. Here's the J.C. Penney float, and then here's Sperry's float. Looks like a very nice float, and as we zoom in, we can see the inverted light bulb on the rear of it. Okay, we can't make out all the other detail on the float. There was another railroad represented in the parade as well, and that's the Grand Trunk Railroad, shown by this type of float here with a little engine pulling the car, which is pretty unique actually. Not sure how they pulled that off. And those of my generation remember this grocery store, H.A. Smith Stores. And of course this float here represents them. And I'm not sure what all this is supposed to mean. Maybe the early days of the store. Looks like some pioneers out front sitting there. This float here, Montgomery Wars, another name from our past that we remember quite well. And this looks like just some horses pulling a big wagon with people just piled on the back end having a good time. And this float from the Michigan Elevator Exchange, it says Lansing and Port Huron on there. The Port Huron elevator was right down to the foot of Grand River. And this entry from the Mueller Brass Company, you can see that they have the globe on one side and the light bulb on the other, and the bridge in between that says Lights Golden Jubilee. This one from Morton Salt Company, two great achievements. I guess they put their salt right up there with the light bulb. If you like salt well enough, it might be up there with the light bulb. Not all the floats were fancy. Here's an old truck, but on the back, I think they pretty well got their point across. This was the St. Clair River District Transportation Club. And it shows three means of transportation, the shipping, the train, and of course the automotive, or a truck in this case. Planes weren't that big at that time, so that wasn't shown. Then of course the portrait of Edison, and then the pennant that says Lights Golden Jubilee. And I think the United Trucking Service pennant is a commercial for the company that let them use their truck for the float. And I did say old truck, but this could have been a new truck. I'm just dating myself here. And then at the end of the parade, they had all these cars that were dolled up and dressed up, and people wanted to show their cars off and what a great job they did. And I'm sure that there were several of those as well. This photo here isn't a very clear photo, but it gives you an idea of the crowds that were watching the parade and the excitement that was there. I think this was a great parade for Port Huron. Another way they celebrated Lights Golden Jubilee is the dedication of Edison's boulder in Pine Grove Park. As a boy, I played all around this boulder. I never even realized the significance of it until a half a century later. I guess I'm a slow learner. A month before the Jubilee of Light, in September of 1929, there's these folks up here in the upper part of Michigan Bum, called Kindy, Michigan. They were digging out this boulder, and it looks like it's quite a job. And once they got it out, they had to transport it all the way down to Port Huron, and I would hope that they didn't put it on the back of this truck. I think the truck would have been a goner. I would imagine they got it to the railroad and put it on a rail cart and brought it down through Pine Grove Park and took it off there. That's just what I'm thinking. Here you can see the workers that had just put the forms around for the foundation for the boulder. I'm not sure why they have that ladder, unless it was to cut some branches that might have been in the way at the top. Finally, the folks of Port Huron gave their permanent remembrance to celebrate the achievement that transpired 50 years earlier, the dedication of the Edison boulder here. There's a little confusion about the actual date this transpired, whether it was the 21st or the 19th. I've seen it both ways. 21st would make more sense. That was the day of Jubilee, but it could have been a couple days earlier. The evening of October 21st, 1929, all the folks went home that evening and turned off all their lights when it was dark. The radio broadcast told them exactly when Thomas Edison put the two wires together and the light was formed. And when that moment happened, everybody in Port Huron turned their lights back on. And there was still a mini celebration for that day. Much like New Year's, with the banging of pans and the honking of horns and the lights being turned back on, I think it was the end of a happy day in Port Huron. In our next video, we'll look at a couple more events at the Desmond Theater, and then we'll move on down the street.